So are you committed to freedom? So first of all, let's talk about what freedom is before we talk about a you that's committed to it. So what is freedom? So freedom is what's happening. Like, it is this experience, whatever the experience is. But that sounds like really naff if you're new to this subject and this moment, like what's actually happening here now, is uncomfortable. So to a lot of people, they'll be like, but how can this be freedom? It feels so uncomfortable. When I first got into this subject, I got into it through Buddhism. And as soon as they started directing me to put my attention in the present moment, I realized that there was a freedom there. Like, I knew what was being talked about. And so maybe there is like a resonance with that there's something about not being lost in mind activity, not being lost in thought, not taking yourself so seriously, that is very freeing. You know, it's what Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now. Ramana Maharshi, when he talks about consciousness. Thich Nhat Hanh, when he speaks about putting the attention in this moment. And what I really like about non-duality is they point out two constants that are always here in every moment. Like two constant experiences. And that is a consciousness and this sense of I am. Everything else is changing. The views change, the thoughts change, the feelings change, the person changes, your ideas change, your narrative changes, you change, the body changes, the family change, the friends change, everything else changes, but the consciousness and the sense of I am always remain. They never leave. And I love that that's depicted, because it's like these are the two freedoms that are. And when you go really deep into what consciousness and the I am are, they kind of disappear in a way. It's like an intimacy with experiencing, where there's nothing left that can be said about experiencing. It's kind of happening and not. It's like really mystical and magical. And so all different teachers and traditions speak about it in different ways. So some will say that you have to try to be in the present moment. Some will say there is no you that could be in the present moment. Some will talk about becoming one with flow, becoming your authentic self. Others will speak about hearing God's will or hearing God's voice or letting the divine navigate you. Like all different types of things. But I really like the non-duality aspect of that there's two things in experience that always are when everything else changes. And that is this consciousness and this sense of I am. When we first start out, we always take things in the narcissistic sense and believe that the consciousness is the personal awareness or is the voice in the head, like I am conscious or I am somebody. So we believe that the I am belongs to you as the narrator in your head and you as somebody that's conscious. But as you begin to go down the path, you begin to realize everything that you think and know about yourself, even the narrator in the head that feels so intimate, the one that's choosing and saying, I like this person, I don't like that person, is always in flux, and the I am and the consciousness remain the same. But that person comes and goes. That person isn't always there, you know, when you're watching TV or when you're like laughing immensely or creating art. Where is that voice in your head that's like describing who you are, and what you should be? So the goal of non-duality is to recognize this consciousness and this I am, and kind of swap from being an identified person that believes it is conscious and that it is somebody that exists separately from this universe, to being that consciousness and being that I am. Which is what you've always been in a way, because you've never lost consciousness, you've never not been conscious. Even in deep sleep there is consciousness, there's just the absence of things to recognize it by, and your brain isn't thinking, so it's not remembering something as an experience. So there's always this consciousness and this I am. And it's like a shift over. So they come forward and the person kind of goes into the background, or the person kind of shifts out of the way. So the experiencer goes back to who the experiencer's always been, which is this consciousness. And this consciousness is immensely spacious because it doesn't belong to someone. So consciousness is not a thing. It doesn't belong to the body, it doesn't belong to the mind, it doesn't belong to people. It's everywhere and nowhere. Like, so look now, like where does your consciousness start and stop? Like, does it like stop here? Like, I'm conscious to here, but if that's true, then how are you conscious of me? Because I'm outside of like this line and where you've agreed that you stopped. I'm appearing inside your consciousness, and this room is appearing inside your consciousness. These sounds, everything is appearing inside of this consciousness, which is so miraculously, fantastically beautiful. So everything is inside this consciousness, and this I am, this sense of being, like I am. Is there anything that's outside of that I am? Like I am, not I am a name, I am a thought, I am a thinker, like this sense of being. It's here, it's vibrantly alive and free, and it's the birthright of everything. No matter how many hells you feel like you've experienced in this life, it's there as the birthright to all things. It is all things. It is all things. You could call it love, like absolute unconditioned love. It doesn't reject something, not love as a condition, like I love you and now you are my sweetheart. Like love as not a thing. Like it's absolutely unconditioned. It doesn't want anything. It's just here. So you can go back to calling it this moment, and you'll notice that this moment is always here. So instead of calling it consciousness or I am, you could say this moment is always here. It never leaves the moment, no matter how much you try to bury your head in the sand or like run to the moon to escape this moment. You must realize that there's always what's happening. And the illusion is that what's happening is something that is separate from you, that you're a separate entity that lives inside this body. Your consciousness is small, you're inside here, and you are this thought, this thinker inside of your head, and your happiness is dependent on the thinker making the right choices. And that's not true. You are this consciousness that can never make a mistake, that's all things, that's silent, that's spacious, that's free, that's love, that's never left, that's always accepting and embracing. Always here. It never left you. You seemingly left it by this dream of you, the dream of you, your problems, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, where you're going to go. Like this imagining of a you that's inside this brain, and you're always imagining yourself, what you look like, how other people are perceiving you. I am this body and this is how other people perceive you, but that's not true. That's relatively true in the human communication world, but in this moment there is nothing experiencing. This consciousness is not a thing. We cannot grab consciousness, but yet it's always here experiencing. Here she goes. Khaleesi is back. Whoa, 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 whoa. She's just joining in like, this is it, this is it, this is it. And it's so intimate and wild, this experience. It's so full on. What's happening for most people is that they can't handle this moment. It's too much. So they're trying to numb it by living in a story of what's happening rather than what's happening. Like, oh, the dog is barking, the dog should or shouldn't be barking, and and it pulls all the attention up into the head, and then it like distracts from the weirdness of all the bodily sensations, the emotions, the feelings, because when you were a child, you didn't know how to authentically be yourself, so you had to hide up in your brain to try to fit in with this mass collective reality and cut off from knowing yourself or being yourself. You felt like you had to become someone in order to survive. I have to be something other than what I am, which is this consciousness and this emptiness. And then that manifests through as a like authentic person. And then the child starts like, oh, I've got to behave like this, I've got to do this, and it starts more and more becoming just bound in the head and in thought. And then everything is seen through a dream of your thoughts. Like you're no longer really seeing the world, you're no longer really seeing the room or the sofa or the windows or the other people. You're seeing your dream of them. I mean, you could say that you're never really seeing it, as in you get really deep and existential about the nature of like all these neuro pathways creating a reality and holograms and etc. But if you just come back to this other part, which is like really not seeing, you're narrating a story of what you're seeing rather than what you're actually seeing. A sofa, the dog is sitting on a bed, they're walking across the floor, and that's not what's happening. What's happening is way more intimate and mysterious than that. That's your story of what's happening. And then the humans get so embedded in this story because they believe it makes them feel safe, but it doesn't really. In some ways it creates safety, but it creates a lot of false safety and discomfort because you're becoming smaller and smaller and narrower, whereas your essence is boundless and free. It's infinite. And that's what you want, is this infiniteness. This intimacy with everything that's happening. That's what you had as a child, and then you lost it. Like most people in childhood had this sense of freedom, and then they lose it as they become more identity, more thought bound. You are not a thought. I mean, you can get really like, everything you say can be contradicted. You could get existential, you could say the whole world is a thought, but forget that part. We're just talking in a more simplistic language, sort of. Yeah. We're not going into all the contradictions simultaneously. So then the question arises, are you committed to this? Now that's a bizarre question, because who would be this I that's committed to it? But I mean this illusory I. Is this illusory I that feels like, you know, it commits to taking a job, it commits to getting married, it commits to having children, it commits to having a dog. Like, I mean that person, the illusory person. Is that illusory person committed to freedom? Like, is that really what they want? Like, is it really what you want is freedom? Or is what you want just a bit more happiness in your flow, or to feel a bit better in your experience, but you don't want too much freedom, just a little bit of freedom, which I come across quite often. And the reason that it's an important question is not because you exist and that we need to inherently take everything that you feel and experience as really serious, but it's this momentum, because prior to waking up, there does seem to need to be a person that's committed to it often. Not all the time. There's exceptions to every rule. But this commitment to going beyond yourself. You know, you might come into this subject and you might not actually be committed to wanting to be free. You might be committed into like wanting to put yourself down more, you know, like more things that you failed at, believe it or not, or like come into this subject and it like become a new story, a new excuse to beat off the rest of the world with, which isn't a problem. When I say beat off the rest of the world, it's like, yes, now I am this practicing non-dualityist and I'm going to become enlightened and therefore I'm better than you all. It does all types of dances. I used to do that. I remember becoming Buddhist and being very proud and wanting to walk around looking like a Buddhist so everyone knew I was a Buddhist and that I was doing all that type of stuff. I am spiritual. Or is it an excuse to not do things, to give up on your work, give up on your family? Like it's all just too much hard work. You know, it can be all types of things. And so, you know, now after 10, 11 years of working with people, I begin to realize that maybe this question is important because it is a commitment. It's a completely different way of living. Like really questioning everything you think you know and are. Like continuously prepared to expand and to not stay as one thing. Even if you wake up, to not stay as one thing of woken up. That this life, like in form, is always fluid. And the one thing that we know always is what we are, is this consciousness and this I am. That is the fundamental of what we know, and then the character and everything else changes in that. And I know it seems contradictory, like to have an I that is committed, but when you are there, like you're going to be committed to other things, whether it be kids, eating a good amount of chocolate, drinking alcohol. And so are you committed to this subject? Do you really want to be free? Because I speak about non-duality, which precludes the idea of a separate self that can do things and does do things and has volition. It kind of gives people the impression, oh, I'm just going to sit on the sofa and then one day things are all going to change and I'm going to be feeling better. And that's not the case for most people. Most of the time it is like looking inside themselves and being prepared to challenge themselves, what they think they know, who they think they are, their systems, their ideas, their relationships, seeing that none of it's true. I mean, that's a really far out thing, like that you're children, so you might think that you have children, to really realize that you don't have children, that you don't have parents. Like all of these are concepts, but if you're not committed to it, then it's kind of like you decided to, you know, like sit and watch a Pilates lesson. And then afterwards you like describe the feeling of what Pilates is like. But you don't know, you're just sitting there watching it because you're not really prepared for it. Like this really isn't like for beginners, like, oh, I'm just going to try a little bit of spirituality or non-duality and see, just does a shake. Because nothing's going to happen, you know, if you're just like, oh, listening to a few talks and not really like questioning and integrating it into your life, then nothing's going to happen. And in a few years you'll be like, yeah, non-duality doesn't work. She is a rubbish teacher. Now she's trying to turn it on me and saying that because I didn't participate in practices that I'm a rubbish student. I'm just being silly. I'm not meaning to mock anyone or myself in that case, although in some way I am. I'm just trying to bring some light relief into what could be potentially a heavy subject and the most divinely beautiful subject. Like in every moment, it's a commitment to being here, but it's not anyone being here. But when you are identified and when there's a seeker, what that might manifest like, and what I am always promoting is putting your attention into this moment. So a commitment to putting your attention in this moment, and then at some point it shifts over. There's not anybody doing that anymore. It's like this moment. But while there's somebody there putting the attention in this moment, like an absolute commitment to it. And that's not an easy thing, because the reason that you're not in this moment is because you've been terrified of this moment. You're terrified of your feelings, of your experience, of like what you feel with other people, like what's happening. So you've gone up into this narration of what's happening. So rather than feeling afraid when you're speaking to someone, you might be putting them down in your head, which is making you feel better, for example. So actually to come and stand in front of someone and to feel afraid, like just to be there vulnerably afraid, is really intense. Like, so to step out of your narration of what's happening, to come back to what's actually happening, it really takes commitment. Like, are you really prepared for this? Non-duality isn't talking about bliss. When this shift happens, there is like a great relaxation that happens, but that's not inherently the goal in a way, because the goal has to be like you surrender, you give up this goal of like, oh, I'm going to get bliss soon, because that's another story. That's you daydreaming up here. What's actually happening is surrendering to what's happening. It's like really being prepared to die to every moment. So it's like if there is like somebody dying in front of you, like really being with them in all the uncomfortableness of that, like really staying present and not like detaching and going up into a narration of like the doctors are doing bad, or this is bad, or that's bad, or it shouldn't be happening. Like really like staying in the vulnerability of that and not knowing what to say. But it's beautiful, like to really experience life. Like really experience life. And that is the freedom to really experience life, not avoid life. This isn't talking about avoidance, about detachment. It's talking about really being integrated. And when you really here, present, there's also another reality that opens up where it's like there is nobody that's present. There is only presence. Your essence is presence. Your essence is presence.